Hello guys, my name is Danielle, and for those who don't know, I am the 3rd through 5th grade teacher at Exodus Church. And today our story is about Paul. Now, when you think about like heroes of the Bible, Paul is like one of those super mega heroes that did all sorts of great things. The thing about Paul is he actually started off as a super villain. When he was a young man, his name was Saul. And Saul, he was going to become a Jewish leader, and he thought he was very important for all that. And he found out about Christians, and he hated the Christians. In fact, he went around trying to arrest Christians. But then one day when he was out traveling trying to arrest the Christians, God found Paul, and Jesus came to Paul and said, "Paul, not going to happen anymore. You're not Saul anymore. You are now Paul." And Paul believed in Jesus and turned his life around, become actually one of the greatest missionaries of his day. Paul, he traveled all over the Eastern Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire, this is the eastern half, this is the western half. Paul traveled all over the eastern half on missionary journeys. But one thing he never got to is he never got to Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire. But God had promised him, "Paul, you're going all the way to Rome." Now, the thing you have to understand about the Roman Empire is that it was big. It was like the United States kind of big. In fact, it was so big that if Rome is like the capital, and that's like Washington, D.C., the Roman Empire was so big that it was divided into provinces, sort of like the United States is divided into states. And every province had a capital. So the province that Paul came from was the province of Judea. And the province of Judea, that's sort of like saying Washington State. Its capital was the city of Caesarea, right there. So Caesarea, that's sort of like saying the capital of Washington State is Olympia. But it wasn't the biggest city. The biggest city was Jerusalem, just like the biggest city in Washington is Seattle. So it was a lot of things that were the same, but there were a few differences. One thing that was different is that today we get to vote for our governor, our person who's in charge of our state. Back then, they also had governors, but their governor was appointed by the emperor in Rome, who was like the president of the Roman Empire. The other thing that was different is that back then, the way that Rome got so big is Rome was an empire. That meant that Rome went out and they fought other people and they conquered them and said, "Okay, you're now part of us." And if there was some little king in the place where they just conquered, they said, "All right, king, you are now working for us. We'll still let you be in charge, but you have to do what we say." That's why sometimes it's confusing in Bible times. It talks about a place having a governor and a king. The governor worked for Rome, and the king was like the guy that was there. His family had been there for a long time and still had a little bit of trouble, a little bit of power. As long as he listened to the Romans, he didn't have trouble. But that's important because Paul is going to have to deal with a lot of these people. Because Paul, when he was going around and preaching about Jesus and telling everyone about Jesus, those Jewish leaders that Paul didn't become part of, well, they ended up hating Paul. They hated Paul so much they wanted to actually kill him, and the only way to keep Paul safe was to arrest him. And when he was arrested, there was like a big riot, people yelling and shouting and like, "Get Paul, get Paul." Well, at that time, the governor was named Felix. So Felix is the governor of Judea. He worked for the Romans. And Felix, he was kind of a wishy-washy kind of guy. He liked to try to make everyone around him happy. So when he called the Jewish leaders together and they interviewed Paul and like, "Okay, what'd you do? And Felix is like, he didn't really break any laws. He didn't really do anything wrong, but he didn't want to make the Jewish leaders upset. So he kind of kept Paul. And then when the Jewish leaders weren't around, he would go to Paul and he would ask him, "Tell me about this Jesus. I've heard about him. I've been around for a while. I've heard about his teaching." And so Paul started to teach Felix about the teachings of Jesus. But Felix, every time Paul started to get in too deep, too much, Felix would get scared. He's like, I got something to do over there. We'll talk later. And he'd get back to him. And he did that for 2 years. For 2 years, he kept Paul in prison and not really giving the Jewish leaders their way and not really setting Paul free for 2 years. And he never actually ended up leaving. He always listened, but then he got scared and stopped and wouldn't leave. After 2 years, Felix was done being the governor, and the next guy that was the governor was named Festus. Now, Festus was much more of a get-it-done kind of guy. So within like the first few weeks of Festus being in power, he says, okay, Jewish leaders, what's up? What's the deal? And they said, well, there's this guy named Paul, and we want Paul gone. We want Paul destroyed. And Felix says, okay, come on up to Caesarea and set your case for Paul. Why do you hate Paul so much? They came in and he had to do it all over again. He had to be on trial all over again. Now that he's been arrested for Felix. And Felix is again like, he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't break any rules. Why are you Jewish people? Why do you hate him so much? And Felix, he hadn't been in the area very much, so he didn't really understand it. Well, by this time, after 2 years of waiting in prison, Paul's like, okay, that's it. I've had enough. He says, you know what? I am a Roman citizen. And that was a special thing. Not everyone was a Roman citizen. As a Roman citizen, I demand to go to Rome and be tried in Rome. That way, enough with this local courts. Take me to the Supreme Court. That's where I'm going. Once Paul had done that, it was a done deal. Those Jewish leaders, they had to go pouting back to Jerusalem. They couldn't do anything more because the Jewish law says Paul had to go to Rome. Which means that God was keeping his promise to Paul, but very much not the way Paul thought it was going to happen. A few days later, the local king of the area, Agrippa, he came to visit Festus. You're the new leader, I'm the leader that's sort of here. They got to know each other. And Agrippa had heard of Paul. So Paul came before the two of them and told his story all over again. Paul, who used to try to arrest Christians, was now on trial 3 times. And he told his whole story about Jesus and why he believed in Jesus. When Festus heard Paul's story, Festus was like, Paul, you're nuts. You gave over being a Jewish leader to follow this Jesus guy? That's just crazy. You gave everything up. And Festus didn't believe. King Agrippa, he didn't believe either, but he kind of felt sorry for Paul. He's like, Paul, if you had just, not said anything about Rome, if you just left it up to us, we would have set you free. But now that you've said, I want to go to Rome, the Romans law says we have to send you to Rome. And so Felix, even though Agrippa felt sorry for Paul, he didn't believe. And so Paul had just spent 2 years in prison and he didn't get anyone to believe. He'd spent a couple years before telling people all over the world about Jesus and getting all sorts of people to believe. But for those 2 years in prison, locked down, he couldn't get a single person to believe. And that had to be really hard on Paul. Now, I know a lot of us, we've been locked down for a couple of months. But Paul, can you imagine 2 years of being locked down, feeling like he's not getting anything done, not accomplishing anything? That would be really hard and frustrating for Paul. He was probably wondering, God, what are you doing? Why am I in this bad situation? Why am I locked down? Why is nothing working out the way I want it to? Well, to answer that, I actually have a Bible verse that's actually from Peter. And Peter, he said in 2 Peter 3:9, he said, the Lord isn't really being slow about his promise, as some people think. No, he is being patient for your sake. He does not want anyone to be destroyed, but wants everyone to repent. In other words, sometimes God's really patient because he wants us to have the chance to tell everyone about his son Jesus and share the good news with everyone. The thing about Paul, God was keeping his promise to Paul. He was sending Paul to Rome in a really weird way, but more importantly, what Paul was doing when he was arrested, and especially when he was in prison waiting to go to Rome, and once he got to Rome and waiting his turn to go to court, Paul was writing. And so actually, if you look at our New Testament, the New Testament goes from right about there, that's the New Testament, to there. And of the New Testament, that much of it is written by Paul. And Paul did a lot of that writing while in prison. So even though to Paul it felt like nothing was happening, God was really working great things because this New Testament that Paul wrote actually has shared the good news with people for thousands of years. Paul didn't reach those 3 men, but he's been reaching people for thousands of years ever since. So don't think that God's not working right now, because I promise you, he is working, even if you can't see what it is or what's it about. God's got a bigger plan, and we need to trust that. So thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great week.